I know all the excitement we just heard is either from my fellow Running Start mentees or we're really excited to go to the Sky Lagoon after this. Now, before I get started, I just want to take the time to really thank all the women leaders here and all the global leaders for welcoming my fellow Running Start cohort members. You all have really become so welcoming, so kind, and so inspiring to us. I know it was challenging for me to go into some of these spaces, and you all made us feel really included, so thank you. Now, I want you to all close your eyes. We've just spent the last 3 days learning from leaders across industries and across the world. Really sink into that. Imagine the biggest lessons you've learned. How will you implement those lessons when you go back home? Okay, you can open up your eyes now that you have that lesson in mind. Yesterday, we heard a really inspirational quote that has stayed with me, and I know it's stayed with many of you all because I've heard it throughout discussions today. Women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. We've heard that a lot. Anino, given your leadership in the corporate world and in entrepreneurship, what concrete steps can we take to uplift women to top decision-making positions in the private sector? How can women founders secure sponsorships when building and scaling innovative firms?
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to Hannah, to Aaron, to Christy, to Dee, and the whole team for a wonderful couple of days. And of course, to my esteemed co-panelists and to all of you who are in the room. So many amazing women and male allies have been in the room with us over the last 2 days. Apparently, 500 people registered. I'd like to, just before I answer that question, to ask a question of all of you. Imagine this was the world, and I had the world in my palm. When you reflect on all the people who have been in here for the last day and a half, many who you've met, many who you've listened to. And the answer to this question is either yes, no, or maybe. And the question is, how many of you, if I had the world in my palm and it was given to us, how many of you who thinks that the people that have been in this room for the last day or two have the capability of running the world? So it's yes. Anybody for a yes?
Yes.
Anybody for a no? Anybody for a maybe? So it's been an overwhelming yes. And that's the reason why we're here, because we actually believe in the power of women's leadership. And now, when we're looking at concrete actions, what are those actions we can take? The first thing I would like to do is to put it into a context. And that context is simply that of women, power, and influence. When you get into positions, your role gives you power. But we need to move from power to influence. And influence is where change happens. And if we're trying to elevate women into leadership, there are certain things that we can do. But when we think about it, it is exercising, using our power to influence change. Our power to influence change is bigger than this room, is bigger than the collection of all the organizations that we represent. It is our networks, it's our thought leadership, it's our speaking engagements, and our ability to change policy and shape and change policy as well. So how do we lift women into leadership? Well, the difference between mentoring and sponsoring, I believe that when we're talking about elevating women, we've talked about it a couple of days ago, yesterday. But mentorship is a bit like, we're talking about elevating. So let's use the example of an elevator. So we want to mentor a woman on how to get onto the lift up to the 10th floor, whatever it is. So, you're talking to her and you tell her that, well, in my experience, what I did was, I got dressed. I made sure I was well dressed to get on the elevator. I got to the elevator and I had this power of intentionality. I decided, I had a plan, right, on how to get to the 10th floor. And there was this elevator. And then I pressed the lift. And when I pressed the lift, then you then tell her, but actually, you know, you're young, a different generation, you probably use AI technology and it's probably different or whatever it is. And you know, advice is great, but you can decide to discard the advice. Sponsorship is pressing that damn button for her to get into the lift, to get to the floor, and pressing the right floor for her. Sponsorship is about opening the doors of opportunities, not just telling you how to do it, but opening those doors. In fact, Angelica, I don't think you actually looked at that, but I wrote an article on LinkedIn a year ago. I just checked it out now, and it had, I don't know, tens of thousands of views and a lot of commentary, where I simply said, female founders do not need mentors, they need sponsors. Of course we know you need mentors, but really it's opening the doors to opportunity that we need. You need the money, you need the financing, you need the networks, you need the marketing, you need people who are actually going to say, yes, come in. And that is where we need to act on influence. And just very lastly, I've seen an example myself, this was in Davos, the World Economic Forum, with Christine Lagarde. She was the head of the IMF at that time. And she says, as the head of one of the most important financial institutions, very often, when I'm sitting in a room around with men and we're talking about women into positions, and it's a bit like we need a woman in that position or the other, and the men say we can't find a woman. Through no fault of theirs, it's simply because our networks tend to be gendered, right from birth and school and all of that. So within the networks, they can't find. We've talked about how most of these positions aren't through a headhunter, they're through networks. And she says, at that point in time, I bring out from my pocket a list of 10 or 12 women. So you can't give women opportunities if you don't know who they are. So find those women, even women who we've met here today, and you'll find, and write down their names and put that point, right? You find them on LinkedIn or you have the contacts, and when that opportunity comes, you open the door for her. So we need to be concrete. And for policymakers, when it comes to finance, my doctoral studies were about opening the taps of finance to SMEs. And through my course of my study, at the Bank of England, over a course of 10 years in the 80s, was having this meeting every year with banks with a report on how much they're lending to SMEs, because the government had decided that for SMEs you needed to have finance and you couldn't leave it to markets. So leaving it to markets is a fallacy, right? If something is good for the economy and the market is not responding, you need policy. We have a lot of policymakers. Even if it isn't in your field, you have the power of influence to influence those that are your colleagues, right? And within those cabinet networks and in parliament and whatever. So use the power of influence to make sure that we get women into those rooms. We open the doors, access visibility, 100 women at Davos, many of them in the room. That is exactly what we do.
Perfect. I love that call of action. Find those women, uplift those women. Thank you so much. We've all celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Women's Day Off, but as we've remembered this morning, it is also the 25th anniversary of the UN Women Agenda for the UN Women Peace and Security Agenda. Kateryna, how can conversationalists here be a catalyst or ally for peace, democracy, and security in their home countries?
Thank you. Thank you, Angelica, for your questions, and dear sisters, dear colleagues, dear friends. First of all, thank for your strong inspiration and strong motivation to continue our struggle for dignity, for freedom, for peace in our country, which suffered from Russian unprovoked aggression, and to continue our work to ensure equal rights for women and men, to ensure equal opportunities, equal access to resource, and equal access to results, which is very important for us. And I personally and my sisters from Ukrainian delegation, we will bring this motivation and this inspiration to our beloved Ukraine. And to Ukraine, which is in fire, unfortunately, at the moment, to Ukraine which continues to struggle. And your support and your solidarity are very important for us. And we also bring this solidarity to our people, to Ukraine, and we know that a lot of countries in the world, and Iceland and others, you support us very, very strongly. But we also bring networking, which is very important for us. New contacts, new faces, new ideas, and as well as new knowledge, which honestly fully confirmed our vision of peace and security in the modern world. A lot of conversationists have confirmed that we should talk about holistic security. Security is not only absence of war, but security in energy sector, transport security, also like information and freedom from hybrid threats, economic security, ecological, climate, etc., etc. And my recommendation to all countries and all participants to include such holistic vision of security in your national action plan on 2025. And I am very proud to inform you that just today our brave civil society organizations have public consultations and they discuss the draft of the new national action plan on women, peace and security. It is already the third one developed in Ukraine, and all of them unfortunately were developed and implemented during wartime, which war against Ukraine started in 2014. Next, let's think who are actors of making difference. Of course, government, parliaments, business, scientists, media. We can continue this list, but a strong civil society is essential. And it is one more important lesson from our discussion. And we have very strong civil society in Ukraine, very brave women-led and feministic organizations. We also want to have more male gender champions. And I consider that our efforts will be successful only if we work together. And the third, we cannot continue to live in a system which continues to ignore our voices, voices of women, without real, but systematic, strategic participation of women in all decision-making systems, not only processes, but in systems like it written in the last CEDAW recommendation, we will not have real security in the world and in our region. So as for me, these are very important lessons from our forum.
Thank you so much. Love the inclusion of women in all sectors. Now, I know we've all had concerning feelings about the backlash to gender equality, our regression, but we've also heard some positive news, and there's another quote that stayed with me. Courage has two daughters, anger and hope. Given this takeaway and the news about the Reykjavik Index, Jackie, where can we find glimmers of hope, and how should we invest in that hope?
Awesome. Thank you so much. It has been a great 2 days. I am both tired and energized. I'm not sure how to hold space for that, but I appreciate the opportunity to share some reflections. And from a hope perspective, the Reykjavik Index showed some great potential with young people across Nigeria and Kenya, and how they are viewing gender equality. And I think something that I've learned at this forum, having attended now for my second time, is there's a lot to learn from our friends and colleagues truly across the globe. And so I'm an American, I live in the UK, that data is a bit stark and scary. What is happening across Nigeria and Kenya that we all can take back? I think we've heard some amazing speakers share some lights of hope throughout these sessions. And I also think about young people not only having a positive perception or more positive perception about a woman being able to step into a leadership position, but just their sheer quantity. In the continent of Africa, the average age is 19. We have a lot of potential to maximize their power and influence for men and women. And I also think of people like you. You are on your own journey to potentially run for office. That's why you're here. That's why you're a mentee, of Running Start, along with an amazing other cohort. And we need you to raise your hand and step up. We all need to do that, but I think the younger generation that's coming through is absolutely critical to be involved in part of the conversation, and I'm very, very hopeful about that.
Thank you so much. And that actually leads me to this question for all of you to wrap up. Like you said, many of you have met my fellow Running Start mentees. And yes, we are phenomenal women, but we are also the exception. There are unfortunately not many young people are like us. I know we're all super great. But we really want to engage young people back into civil society, into participation. We've seen their regression of views, and now there's a vacuum of leadership roles that young people are leaving unfulfilled. While we're worried, I do believe as a member of Gen Z that there is still hope for all of us. So for this remaining time, if you could share, some more concrete solutions about how we could advance young people's leadership and participation, anything in the private sector, the public sector, alongside civil society, any concrete steps the audience can take with them to implement back home.
Okay, first of all, is Emma here? Emma isn't here. Okay. She's here. Hi, Emma. Right here. I met Emma at dinner last night, and she was on my table, and I asked her what she was doing, and she spoke to us about her work in AI. And I think I said something like, see you tomorrow, and she said, oh, she wasn't going to be attending. And I thought you should attend, and I spoke to the team, who very kindly said, absolutely, and she could join us here today. I know that Running Start, of course, very formally is part of this, but just simply to say that we just need to bring in young people, men and women, into the conversation, into rooms like this. There is a gender gap, or rather an age generation gap, not just because generations exist, but because very often they are not hearing these kinds of conversations, right? It's not just that they need to learn from us, we actually absolutely need to learn from your generation. And that's the way in which I think it's really, really critical, bring them into the conversation, into the room.
Kateryna?
Yeah. First of all, for me, women leadership is not optional. And it is essential for real, sustainable, and just peace. I also consider that as a government commissioner and representative of government, that governments should integrate gender equality into education system, especially in secondary school, but as well as in universities, and to support different leadership training for young people, for girls and boys, and for teachers. I also see important role of private sector and businesses, and we work very closely in Ukraine with Ministry of Economy and several business corporations like Corn Ferry, and developed very important chapter of human capital resilience, which is important for Ukraine and which paid attention, a lot of attention to young generation. I am from civil society. I spent more than 30 years in women of my life in women movement, and I consider that Even today, being a government commissioner, I belong to women movement in Ukraine, and the role of civil society and civil society organizations, as I mentioned, crucial. And I used to repeat this sentence every time at every stage. And I also have to say that I personally have two daughters, 31 years old and 25. The second was born in 2000, as our resolution thought in 25. And I'm very proud that both of them work for civil society organizations. One for La Strada Ukraine and the second for Health Rights International. So, and as for me, it is a very real example how we can involve new generation and young people in promoting gender equality, women empowerment, and women rights.
Thank you so much. And then Jackie, if you want to close us out.
Yeah, so it's great we have the government representation, private sector representation. You get to wear two hats, civil society. It sounds like you still hold on to that. And I come from the philanthropic sector. And so we need all sectors working together. And I want to come back to Anino's analogy about the elevator or the lift, now that I live in the UK. And someone has to build the elevator. And as my colleague Allison, who's here, always says, somebody has to pay for the things. Some of the things are boring and infrastructure and the groundwork and the grunt work. Someone has to pay for them. And from a philanthropic perspective, we need more friends, fellow travelers coming along with us to invest in building the elevator, investing in leadership representation, leadership development, better systems and tools, better data and evidence. Those pieces are critical and often get missed in the government budgets or the private sector priorities. That said, those other sectors have your own access to different kinds of resources. Some of them are financial, some of them are influence, some of them are your brand, your voice, even your time. And so that investment is how we're going to build that actual elevator together.
Great, thank you so much. We're at time, and now let's take our metaphorical elevator and go to the next level. Thank you so much.